You're listening to the Today's Family Lawyer podcast, the leading source of daily news and insight for family law practitioners in England and Wales. Sign up to our free weekly newsletter at todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk and subscribe to hear all the latest news and views from across the family law sector. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello and welcome along to the latest Today's Family Lawyer podcast. Today I have Matt Davies joining me to discuss brand, culture, marketing, sales, all those words that legal service providers are not often particularly au fait with, Matt. So thank you very much indeed for joining the podcast. I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, and I can imagine there's a lot of twitching, wincing folks thinking, "I'll know what's coming up." But hopefully we can add some value and make it simple and useful to folks as we go through the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a 101. You describe yourself as a brand and culture business consultant. You're the author of Storyatogy, which is a book about brand narratives. I'm not going to say a huge amount more. You're probably going to introduce yourself better, but tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and why branding. What is it that you particularly bring to that conversation?
Great question. And where do we start? I've had a weird roller coaster of a career, to be honest with you, David. And I won't go and bore you through all the details, but I guess the highlights would be that I started my career in the arty-farty field of graphic design, right? That's where it started. And I was on the Macs in the studios creating brochures, websites, logo designs, very much on the deliverables kind of front. And throughout the course of I guess I'm getting on now, so it's probably 20 plus years now of my career, and perhaps quite early on, what I got really frustrated with was folks didn't seem to know the answers to the big questions, right? So I'd ask, okay, so you want a brochure. Well, why do you want the brochure? Oh, because we want to promote our services. Okay, well, why are you special? What are you about? Why are you different? And all these things. And we'll touch on this a little bit later. And I found that when we started asking some of the big questions, even some of the firms I was working with, across all categories of industry, particularly marketing folks, funnily enough, they knew that they had a job to do. They knew they had short-term targets to hit, leads to generate, sales to make, if you like. But when it came to the bigger questions of the value that they played long-term, there's a massive kind of disconnect. And so what I found, as I developed through my career, was there's massive value in working with leaders and teams to really work out the direction. Where are we going? Where are our North Stars? And why is that helpful? And I'd always ask the question, well, why do you exist beyond making money, right? That's a massive question for folks to think through. And I know your listeners, will be like, well, I do this to make money. And it's like, you do. But the issue you've got with that is if I came up to you and said, like, why do you do what you do? And say, I do it to make money. Frankly, nobody cares that you want to get rich. Some people will be like, well, I'm a bigger firm. I have investors. I do what I do because I need to pay them dividends. It's like, well, no one cares. They want to get rich, right? So why do you do what you got to do? And what I realized was you need to have an answer, a compelling answer that customers can find, super exciting, something customer centric. But then as my career developed even further than that, it became really important to figure out, well, it's not just about customers, because as you scale and grow your business, you need other people to rally around you. So if you're trying to recruit somebody now, you need a message and a reason beyond making money to kind of excite them and to get them on board. And here's the kicker, David, it has to be true and it has to be authentic, because in today's world, you'll get found out. So yes, for you personally, you might be trying to make money, but your brand, your business, what it's trying to do in the world, it needs to have a narrative, a story, a way of positioning itself that's effective in its marketplace. And perhaps we can talk about all of that in a minute. So I started off very much like that. I've grown, I've run various businesses. I built my own creative agency. I sold that. I've worked for big corporates. I've worked across the world in more recent times as a consultant. I think this is my fifth or sixth year as a consultant. And it's going really, really well. And I think where the silver sort of lining throughout my career has always been this bizarre over-caffeinated skill, I would say, to add momentum and energy and to rally people around ideas. You know, you sort of said, well, what do you bring to the conversation? I think that's what I do. I'm an energizer, if you like, a momentum builder. And so I get hired often to help, first of all, align teams, usually leadership teams, and second of all, to keep the momentum going as they seek to build something really meaningful in the world.
You've just answered all of my questions in 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to make up a whole load of new ones. Let's start by that branding 101 question. What is branding? What isn't it? What myths can we bust?
All right. So here's the thing. If you talk to the average person, if I said, what's a brand, they would instinctively go back to the logo, right, of a company. So if I said, give me an example of a brand, they'd say, well, the Nike swoosh, you know, or the Apple, right, the actual logo, the emblem. But if I was to put that emblem up on a screen somewhere and say to folks, what does this mean to you? There would be different meanings that people would attach. So say I put a Nike or a Nike swoosh up on a screen, and I do this sometimes at conferences, and I say, well, what does this mean to you? You know, some people say, well, it means Nikes. Other people say it means trainers. Some people say it means pain, you know, whatever it is. The point here is that the brand is not just the logo. There's lots of meaning packed behind that logo. And so for me, I define brand as the meaning that other people attach to you and your offer. And it goes beyond actually the simple offer. You know, it's what's that meaning? What is that kind of a connotation? What's your reputation? I guess in your industry, reputation would be something people would say perhaps a bit more. What's your reputation? That's your brand. And then branding, which is the game I'm in, and I think we're all in, you know, whether we know it or not, is the attempt to manage that meaning. Okay, so logos, fonts are useful and helpful, but they're kind of a veneer. They're a signpost to something deeper. There's a lot more going on around the meaning that people attach to you. You know, how are you speaking in terms of your messaging? You know, what do you look like? What does your website look like? All of those touch points, super important. But not just that. How are you behaving? You know, you and your staff, if you're out there in the world, you know, what type of people are you? How are you going about your business? You know, what's, you know, your processes, that kind of stuff, the certain behaviors that you will instinctively do. And I think ultimately brands are judged usually on what those brands do for us and how they make us feel while they're doing them with us. All of those kind of signals come off, put simply, and lodge into our brains, okay, whether we've had a little bit of experience or a lot of experience with that particular business, and we then create meaning in our minds, rightly or wrongly, about that business. And that really is the brand. And branding is to really think through across a whole spectrum of touch points, of experiences that you would create for a customer, to figure out how can you improve that, how can you manage that meaning to affect a better kind of outcome. And if you were to say, well, what's the kind of the outcome that we want? Well, there's two. There's kind of an internal outcome. We want to focus for ourselves. We want our teams to be able to make great decisions. We want customers to choose us and the right type of customer to choose us. So there's kind of a decision-making outcome. We want everybody to make easier decisions. But the other thing I think is there's a massive business reason why you want to think this through, because ultimately, if you've got that long-term goal in mind, the aim of the game will be to get more people to buy more things more of the time from you, right? So that you beat the competition and you win, if that makes sense. And so branding done properly, thought through, considered, gives you a massive competitive advantage across all the typical business functions that you would think through. And I think one final thing I'd add to that is often you think of brand as being something that marketing does, right? Oh, that's a marketing person's, fluffy person's thing. What I like to do is to say to businesses, no, brand is not just a marketing thing. If you take my definition that it's the meaning people attach to us, this goes across business silos, right? So yes, marketing has a stake in it, but so does HR, as I've expressed, because your employees need to understand the brand, how they need to show up for customers, what's expected of them. Your people managers, if you've got those in your firm, they need to think through, well, the behaviors and how we manage the meaning for customers through the actions of our staff. You've got also things like innovation. That's such a kind of a crucial thing. And particularly if you want to sort of stand out in the marketplace, you know, you might want to create new ways of doing things. Well, if you've got a great brand idea in mind that helps you to do that. And so, across all of those things, really, operations, everybody, including finance, I'd say, they need to understand it as well, because it's going to help them make decisions. All of us need to kind of own the brand. And that's my message to leadership teams.
I think you said at the start that there'll be people perhaps listening to this who are twitching and a bit nervous about what they might be listening to. The pushback here is that professional services don't necessarily want to be recognized for being playful or for being
Unusual, I guess.
Unusual.
They don't want to be unusual.
Yeah, quite right. And so how do we match that branding and that enthusiasm you've expressed with that desire to be perhaps serious, perhaps I don't know, stoic, to be credible?
There's a couple of ways we could attack this, but I'm going to attack it this way. The biggest problem that businesses have today, from a kind of a marketing perspective at least, is clutter, right? There's so much clutter. I was just reading up just before I got on this podcast, actually, that the experts aren't entirely sure, in terms of actual research studies, how many advertisements or paid kind of messages we actually see per day. On the heavy side, some people have estimated about 10,000 on the average person in the UK. On the more conservative side, if you're working at home, it might be a lot less. But the point is I think everybody can agree that whenever you go into a place where paid advertising could be there, it's there, and there's a lot of it, and it's very complicated to navigate from a consumer's perspective. And I think what's happened is that we've almost gone back to the days before heavy advertising, which is really, particularly for professional services, I would say, where we listen to what our trusted family, friends, inner circle say. So people buy from people, and we buy usually because of recommendations, and we don't buy kind of straight away unless it's an emergency purchase or a distress situation. We usually like to weigh things up a little bit. We like to get to trust the firm we're buying from. Now, you might say, okay, well, what's all that got to do with what you've been talking about branding? Well, only to say this. Look, if I was to say what makes you different, say I Googled law firm in any particular area where your listeners might be, like law firm, divorce lawyer in Lincoln, right, for the sake of argument, tons and tons and tons of very similar firms would show up, very similar people. I'm just the average person. I might ask some of my friends, but maybe I've got three then down on the table. There's three. They all look very similar. They all look stoic, very credible. How am I going to make the decision, right? And this is where it comes down to, good branding, I would suggest, orientates a business towards the right customer, who if you do a good job, will stick with you for a long period of time. If you are thoughtful about this, you will consider what that customer wants, their position. You'll have empathy with them. You will orientate your services, the way that you do business, your processes. You'll make it simple and easy for them. Now, you can do all of those things while still being credible and stoic and knowledgeable. But it takes thought, it takes consideration, and it takes a very customer-centric orientation. All of that, I would suggest, as well as your look and feel and your touch points, all of that is branding. But if I was to say to you, okay, let's position this law firm in a specific way for a specific type of customer that they like doing business with, is it still enough? And that's a question really for everybody to consider in terms of their marketplace, because you've got to really do a few things. You've got to compare your positioning, your firm, how it's showing up for customers alongside the competition that's around. Usually it's localized in your industry, I understand. So in the local area, how different are you? And are you standing for the right things? If you all look exactly the same, white and blue with stock library pictures of people smiling and shaking hands on the front and happy families, ticking across the website, perhaps you're not stood out enough to start making and selling enough to the right people. So what am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is that branding is important to do carefully and thoughtfully, even if you want to appear stoic and credible. But if you want to amp it up, David, and here's the thing, if you want to amp it up and really stand out and really, and really make an impression, I think you need to go deeper around the type of business you are and the type of people you want to serve. And if you do that, if you can differentiate yourself so that you look amazing to the right person, there's a number of things that you can do. You can really, own the price points and so on. And I've got a strategy for that, which I like to call the onlyness strategy. You see, what I think you want to do is try and become the only choice for the type of customer that you're looking for, right? So there's a little exercise which I know you're familiar with, because we met at an event when I was speaking, and I sort of challenged everybody to do it. But if you asked yourself to fill in this paragraph, right? So the paragraph would go something like this: our law firm is the only law firm that does what? Blank. And you could potentially tweak the second law firm there. So you could say our law firm is the only specialist divorce law firm that does this particular benefit, this particular thing for the customer. Now, if you can do that, I think you're onto something, because that becomes a real kind of pivotal point in your positioning. But just because you can do something different doesn't mean it's useful. So you need to make sure that that is something that the customer also really values and wants and thinks is helpful. And you also want to make sure that your competition can't, encroach upon it. And it's got to be authentic to something that you genuinely care about and you can maintain. So you've got like a number of things. There's like the marketplace, there's the customer, and there's you and your team and what you want to achieve. And all of those things, I would say, need to kind of converge around the sweet spot, which is the truth. And the truth should be something that really is powerful and exciting, that you can leverage and genuinely build a business from.
You've thrown a huge amount of information out there, and there is an element of unpicking all of that. I said at the start of the conversation that there's this link between branding, with marketing, with culture, with sales, with staff. I'm a massive believer in what you said there about everybody being a salesperson for the business. That is lost in a lot of businesses, not just law firms. Sometimes that bit gets lost, where that individual is representing that business, and they forget that, and that's so important. Two questions: how do we link that branding, marketing, culture, sales piece? And the second question is, how do we get buy-in from everybody in the organization?
Okay, so couple of things. I think when law firms start up, it's usually around one person, isn't it? Right. And that person has their reputation, their way of doing things. And they obviously have that super laser focus. And if it stays with one person, then usually that's the way it goes. I mean, that person might want to think through, how different they are, and if other players come into the marketplace and they have similar reputations and standards of success, then you might want to think about how you're doing things. That's the first thing. But what happens is you tend to grow, don't you? And you recruit and you build, and then as time goes on, the original founder usually steps out. And now you're in a situation where you have a leadership team. Now you have a group of people that all need to be aligned. And they all have their own reputations, but they're all part of this law firm. So what does that mean? Well, there has to be some common ground there that unites everybody. And then they'll have their teams and their staff underneath them. And like you say, well, what if solicitor A hires a team of 20 and solicitor B hires a team of 20? What's connecting all of them together, apart from the fact they all get paid from the same place? And I see this absolutely loads in your industry, that not enough thought goes into that question. Like, how do we unite everybody so that we all have a common understanding? We're all rallied around something really customer centric and powerful. So you said, well, how do we do that? Well, as I say, it depends on your growth stage, right? If you're on your own, I think you're in a great place. You still, I would suggest, need to define some core things. And then if you're in a group situation, the first step is, again, to define things. But rather than doing it with one person, you now need to do it with perhaps your leadership team. There's kind of 4 key questions that I like to ask. And before I go through these questions, I think it's really, really important that you don't just ask these of yourselves. See, if the brand is the meaning that other people attach to you, you really need to get out from your side of the desk, walk around and look back at yourself. And the way that you do that is through something we call customer insights. That's one thing that we need to do. And all that basically means is we go out and ask customers some key questions. And now that can be quite awkward if it's you yourself. That's why people like me exist, right? So you hire me, you wheel me in, and I represent, the project to the customer and say, look, ABC Limited are rebranding, and they really value you as a customer, and they really love to just know 10 questions that you can offer, because it's going to really help inform how we shape the future of the business, and we want to make sure that we listen to existing customers like you to make sure that we hold on to all the good stuff that we're doing and improve anything that needs to be looked at. And so what we would do, really, is in those insights interviews, is the biggest question I think there is why do you choose us? Why do you continue to work with us? What was it that brought you to us in the first place, amongst other questions? That is really crucial for us to understand. What do you value about the way we do things? Have you ever thought about any other alternatives? Who were they? And what kept you with us? All these horrible questions that we're scared to ask people, right? But these are crucial to building a successful business. So a lot of insights work needs to be done. And I like to do, as a consultant, I like to do that personally, because I think, you can't really easily farm that stuff out. You can't put some of those questions in a questionnaire. This has to be something that's human, because it's going to draw up emotions and stuff like that. Move on. So that's one aspect of work that needs to be done before we fully define some of the questions I'm coming to. The second bit of work that really should be done, in my humble opinion, is some positioning work. So this is, I mentioned about like your local area, the competition. So based on what the customers have said, well, the customers said, well, I'm aware of like 4 other law firms that I could go to, but I choose your law firm. It's okay. Well, what are those other 3 law firms? Let's get those down in our notes, and then let's go check those out. You might have an idea anyway of the size of organization that you are, the type of law that you practice, and who else is in your area. Let's get all that out, as it were, on the table. Now, what I would do as a strategist is look at all of the touch points of those types of companies. How are they positioning themselves? What messages are they pinging out? Do they have anything different or unusual? Are they clear about their process? Is their process any different to our process? Is there anything that I can see that worries me, right? That they're sort of going to be better than us. And usually, and here's the thing, David, when you do that, and definitely in your industry, and I hope nobody takes offense to this, but I often find that nobody is thinking like this, right? And there's good reason, because you're all awesome at law, and that's your speciality, and that's how you think. But when you start thinking the way I'm talking, this is what gives you the competitive business advantage that might be necessary. And, I know immediately everyone's a bit worried, like, does this mean we're going to manipulate things? And I'm not like that. I'm stoic. I'm a good rep. No, I would say no, because I think branding done properly is truthful and authentic and genuine. And people will see through any sort of facade that you put up that's not real. I'm talking just about doing things a little bit more deliberately, perhaps leaning into areas that that you're super good at. You might have a particular process that is more streamlined than the competition, or gives a better insight into the person going through whatever they're going through, because that you're great at that. There's loads of things you can do. So for example, and you might be doing them already, maybe that you call your client more frequently than the competition, or maybe that you're more available to them, or maybe you don't charge for every letter you send out, or whatever it might be. There'll be little things in the way that you do things that that you're great at, or you could change, and you're open to changing them. So anyway, the point here is that we're looking around. We've listened to our ideal customers and the best customers we've got, and we've got some insight from there. We've looked at the competition and what's out there, and fueled by that, and this is to your point, David, how do we now get everybody rallying around things? What I suggest is that you build depends on the size of your team, but you build and define your brand with everybody. And I think this is particularly important when, say, the founder has just stepped out and a new managing director or CEO steps in. They'll have their own ideas, and that's really important as well. But they need to listen to what everybody else is saying, right? Or it might not be that situation. It might be that, you know, you've just never got round to this and you're an individual and you need to define it. Or it might be that, you know, you're part of a long-term plan. Maybe you've been a partner in the organization for a long period of time, and you just know that you're seeing that you're not aligned. It's starting to get splintered. So you need to get everybody back together. So what I would suggest is you get your senior partners, your senior leaders in a room, and you work through what I'm about to talk about. But remember, you know, this comes about with having a deep understanding of what the customers already believe and the competitors that are out there. And now you marry that with the authentic drive, passion, beliefs that exist within your leadership team and ambitions. And I asked them 4 questions. Why do you exist beyond making money? We've already talked about that, right? Who do we serve? That's a big question. How should we show up for them? And what are we offering them? Now, immediately you're all probably like, well, this is obviously I practice this type of law. That's what I offer. And these types of people are the types of people that buy that type of law. Let's say, well, I'm a divorce solicitor, right? So obviously I'm dealing with people going through divorce. Fine. But you need to go a little bit deeper than that, in my humble opinion, right? Yes, somebody's going through a divorce, but what type of person are they? In terms of your fees, where are you? Are these people high earners? Are they low earners? Where are they? The other big thing I like to think about is in terms of your ideal customer, what's their mindset? You know, what do they believe in? What are they looking for from their solicitor, from their lawyer, that that you can make sure that you're adding value in order to get. So let's just say, for example, you position yourself. I'm the lawyer for high net worth individuals who are going through a divorce, right? Great. Now, immediately I say that, David, right? If I'm positioned for high net worth individuals, you know, that gives us a sense of the type of services and service I need to provide, because these people they have not got much time. Usually they're probably, working hard. They need me to be punctual. They need to understand how everything's going to play out. There's obviously a great deal of pressure on them if they've got, a lot of wealth in the bank. But what else do they believe? So they might believe that their partner shouldn't get hardly anything, right? Or whatever the situation might be. So you can go a step down and say, I'm a lawyer that works with high net worth clients who don't want to give away more than they need to in their divorce. So you can really start to play into, what your customer wants, and how you work. And then you can design yourself around it. Now, some law firms have multiple departments and multiple offerings, and I get that. But the question I would always ask is, well, what unites them? So what I would do there is we get, the teams out. We'd say, just describe your ideal customer. Describe your ideal client. And we do that with all the departments. And we come back together in a workshop situation and we go through each department describing separately their ideal customer. And then we're looking for the threads. We're looking for the themes that really kind of work well. And so, for example, I did some work with a service-based industry a few years ago. Similar situation, partners. It wasn't in the legal sort of sector. It was more in the real estate sector, but it was a similar setup. And one of the things that we realized as we went through these exercises was that the number one reason for their firm's existence was to help people make amazing decisions. So that became the big idea, the rally cry, if you like, as you mentioned. We help people make great decisions around, real estate and investment and stuff like this. Now, it's a similar thing for professional services, but when you come to that realization with your leadership team, like, wow, what a breakthrough, because now you're not looking at what divides you, you're looking at what's uniting you, that's true and authentic. We can then see if that resonates with the customers that we've interviewed and the interviews that we've had from them. And we can see if anyone else in your market is saying anything kind of like that at all. And then we can leverage in those kind of the onlyness statement that I mentioned before to really kind of put the kicker in and differentiate you. And then, as I say, then that's just the start, the definition. If you can get everybody to sign up to that, happy days. And then the question is that's when the real work begins, because how can we truly, genuinely build now processes and customer experiences and employee experiences that reflect that?
We've got about half an hour's worth of conversation there, Matt, which is typically where we sort of try and pitch the podcast at. But I feel like I'm cutting you off if we finish chatting now. If we came into this discussion thinking that branding was about changing our logos, then we're obviously dead wrong. There's so much more to it, and I really value the time that you've invested in sharing some of your insight with us. How do we find out more? I know you've got a podcast of your own that people can go and subscribe to and listen into for more insight. What else do you get up to that would really help people to start to explore this a bit more in their business?
Okay, well, simple thing that I'd absolutely love is for folks to connect with me on LinkedIn, because I'm always speaking about things like this and giving tips and tools and stuff on LinkedIn. So just search for Matt Davies, Davies, and you'll no doubt come across me. But yeah, the other things are I write extensively, right? So I've got a website with a blog on it which you can subscribe to. And there's a couple of free downloads and books and stuff I've written that you can get from that. So that's mrmattdavis.me. And then I guess you mentioned my podcast. You see, that is obviously we would never, David, want other people to subscribe to an alternate podcast. So definitely, stick to this one. But if you happen to, find that you've exhausted all the episodes on David's podcast, then I would love for you to just come over to looking at ours. It's called Just Branding. Best way to get to that is through my co-host, and his website is justcreative.com/podcast. But you can search for Just Branding on any podcast platform and you'll see my ugly mug come up. We interview, experts in brand, so it's a bit nerdy, but you find all sorts of things, and we talk about all this stuff all the time. So if you want to binge, watch on this kind of strategic stuff, let me know. But I think the biggest thing I would say, David, is look, what we've been talking about here is positioning. And so remember those 4 key questions that I asked, and you can do this yourselves. It doesn't need someone like me necessarily to kickstart that conversation. Why do you exist beyond making money? Who do you exist to serve? How should you show up for them? And what is your offer? And if you can answer those simply and succinctly, you're halfway there to defining your brand. And then the challenge is how do you lean into it?
I feel as though we've got an awful lot of value out of this discussion. So I can't thank you enough for joining, Matt. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks so much for having me.
The Today's Family Lawyer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk. My thanks to Matt. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Family Lawyer podcast, the leading source of daily news and insight for family law practitioners in England and Wales. Sign up to our free weekly newsletter at todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk and subscribe to hear all the latest news and views from across the family law sector. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.